Thom Hartmann program, and I want to tell you why I think that by calling out Fox News, that President Barack Obama is crazy like a fox, and I mean that as a compliment. I mean that in a positive way. He's actually using a strategy that was used by George Walker Bush to tremendous personal and political advantage. Here's how it works. In order for there to be a hero in fiction, whether it's Shakespeare or whether it's a dime store romance novel, in order for there to be a hero, there needs to be an anti-hero. There needs to be a bad guy. And the goodness of the good guy, or girl, as the case may be, but the goodness, or woman, as the case may be, but the goodness of the good guy is always defined not by the good guy. The goodness of the good guy is defined by how bad the bad guy is. This is one of the rules of screenwriting and novel writing that most people never think about. But if you notice the movies that you're seeing, notice the books that you've read, the novels that you've read, the stories that you know, even our fairy tales, a good guy can only be as good as the bad guy allows him to be, or defines him as. In other words, Superman would be incredibly boring. He'd be running around stopping bank robberies and preventing car crashes, and it would be an incredibly boring story if there wasn't Lex Luthor. Batman would be incredibly boring if it wasn't for the Riddler and the Juggler and the Penguin and the, whatever. So you have to have an anti-hero to have a hero. George W. Bush created an anti-hero in Osama bin Laden. And I believe it's the reason why for 7 years he never bothered to catch Osama bin Laden. In fact, he even said, I don't care so much about Osama bin Laden. Why? Because he needed him out there. In fact, I believe that Osama bin Laden died in 2002 or 2003, in March of 2003, April of 2003, when they had the funeral for him. And we haven't heard from him since, for all practical purposes. David Gray Griffin wrote a great book about this. I believe it's true. But George Bush wanted to keep him alive because he needed a boogeyman. He needed an evil anti-hero so that he could be as powerful as the anti-hero. In other words, the power, the depth and level of evil of the anti-hero is the ceiling by which the good guy can be good. So President Obama needs an enemy. He needs an antithesis. He needs somebody he can take on. Now, if he overtly made the enemy, for example, the insurance industry, they've got enough money to squash him like a bug. If he overtly made the enemy American business or the American Chamber of Commerce, sadly, our political process has been so corrupted by money. Again, they got enough money to squash him like a bug. So, and if he picked a particular Republican politician, particularly, it would pretty much have to be a senator, but then he would be elevating them to the level of President of the United States. If he started taking on, for example, Tom Coburn, who has, in a one-man gesture, stopped the extension of unemployment benefits. If you're unemployed and your benefits are about to run out, call Tom Coburn's office, Senator Tom Coburn, because he's put a hold on the bill in the Senate, a bill that will otherwise pass as soon as he lets go of that hold. If he were to take on Tom Coburn, he would be elevating him to the level of the president. So that would be a political mistake. But by taking on Fox News is perceived as powerful. Fox News is all over the country. Fox News has millions of viewers. Fox News actually is a political operation. It's run by Roger Ailes, who was in the Nixon White House, who was in the Bush White House. Actually, maybe he wasn't in the Nixon White House, but he was in the Bush #1 White House. Bush #1, Poppy Sr., brought Roger Ailes in as a senior political advisor. Roger Ailes, the guy who runs Fox News, was to Bush what Turd Blossom was to George W. Bush. Well, Karl Rove was to George W. Bush. And so by creating this bad guy, Obama has accomplished two brilliant things. Number one, he's really made the Republican Party the bad guy. But he doesn't have to call out the party itself. So he doesn't elevate the status of Michael Steele. He's instead saying that Fox is the official organ of the Republican Party, the official arm of the Republican Party, which, by the way, is true and has been for all of its, since it came into existence. Roger Ailes started Fox News with money from Rupert Murdoch. Keep in mind, Fox News lost $100 million a year for 5 years. I mean, I find this incredible. People say, oh, Air America failed because they lost $14 million. And, I have a long association. I'm still associated with Air America. They carry my show on their Washington, D.C. station. My name is on their website. I was the guy who replaced Al Franken on Air America, and, for years. And still am on most radio stations. And people, the people on the right, they say, oh, Air America, they failed because they lost $14 million. Air America's biggest crime was undercapitalization. Fox News lost $100 million a year for 5 years before they made one penny. Before they made $1 on Sean Hannity, Fox News lost $500 million. Air America's biggest crime was that they were undercapitalized. But anyhow, my point is that if you had a Republican administration that said, Air America isn't a real news organization, they've got an attitude, they'd be right. And the Bush White House, when I was with Air America and George Bush was president of the United States, was not, they held a radio row inside the White House where they invited talk show hosts in. And here I was, the number one talk show host, and still am, the number one progressive talk show host in America, by any measure, number of stations, number of live clearances, number of listeners, by any measure. And they did not invite me to the White House. The Bush administration did not, because I was with Air America. So if the Obama administration wants to say, Fox News is the official, arm of the Republican Party, or they're promoting the Republican agenda, or even things that are more crackpot than the Republican agenda, they're right. And I think that this is a brilliant way for the president and the Democratic Party, but particularly for the president, to have an enemy so he can be a superhero, a legitimate enemy, and yet still be able to play in the world of politics without muddying that world. I think it's brilliant.